All right, welcome everybody. Glad to have you back to the ISBM members meeting held jointly with our friends from the Sales Excellence Institute at the University of Houston. And our next topic area is something I think you'll all be interested for. We're going to talk about the compensation of the sales force, and ECharles joins us from Exactly. Eric has over 2 decades of experience in marketing, consulting, and product evangelization. He focuses on companies that allow them to drive expansion and growth by aligning positions, responsibilities, and the incentives. He brings a multitude of skills ranging from multinational enterprise to small startup firms, which allows him to craft different models depending on the market, people, and the corporate goals. His title is interesting, and I love this title. I may start thinking about new titles for myself now, but he's the Vice President of Solutions Evangelism at Exactly, and hopefully he'll explain what that is. He serves as a subject matter expert in the area of sales performance management to ensure that Exactly's marketing, sales, and product teams have the necessary strategic input for industry-leading messaging, positioning, and future direction. His experience in technology includes several startups, plus positions at Canon, Sun Microsystems, and Apple. Eric has extensive consulting and research background, focusing on key measures for sales and marketing roles, identification of focal points for improvement in customer acquisition and retention, as well as design and communication of improved incentive plans with strong line of sight metrics. He's an early stage investor and serves as a mentor for emerging companies and serves on the advisory board for several startups and 2 accelerators. And he will be joining us at the end for the tasting, in which case he's going to give us lots of hints of what's going to be the hot new things. I just made that up, Eric. You don't have to share. Need to share. So let me turn it over to you. I'm so excited to hear about this. And Eric would like for people to just type a question in the chat as they feel it, or turn their mic on and interrupt and ask a question. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, you can interrupt me whenever you like. So it's funny, when I was talking to Mike Ahern about this class, this session, we came up with the changing compensation of the sales force. Now, the interesting thing is like, if we want to spend a couple hours on compensation, actually we can spend all day on compensation, we can. But a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is what's happened to the actual, what sales forces have turned into. And really, it's been an ongoing process that's been going on in the marketplace. But also COVID accelerated a lot of things. Earlier, I was the one who mentioned that we have a chief revenue officer that I've never met, and I've been with Exactly for a decade now. That's a change, obviously, under COVID. But we did a state of the global sales survey. We worked with Zogby, did a survey pulling in data from Europe, Asia Pacific, and also North America, to see what's going on. And there were some really interesting things, like the fact that people changing their revenue goals. Now, what I love about the 75% is, by the way, that's split between they raised and lowered. Because if I think of a couple of my clients, I have clients in the hospitality industry. Several of the largest hotel chains in the world are using the Exactly systems, and they obviously reduced their revenue goals as they realized they weren't going to be selling any wedding banquets or large corporate spaces. At the same time, I've got clients like Zoom. We can all guess what happened to their revenue goals, as everybody, including ourselves today, jumped into Zoom, even when they're giving everything away. So it was a huge shift in the organization, which then impacted sales rep quotas. It impacted sales rep compensation. Companies shifted over and put their reps on draws or guarantees of some sort, non-recoverables. Like, we don't want you to quit because we know what it costs us to replace you, and we don't know how long this is going to take. And by the way, when I'm talking, a lot of the data I'm talking about, I'm going to give you survey data, and then I'm going to bring up some research data. The source for my research data is, I'll admit, we have a clause in our contract. So as a company, Exactly manages we got started over 16 years ago managing commission checks. And we put it in our contract, we reserve the right to anonymize and aggregate that data so we can analyze it. And about 5-6 years ago, we actually really kicked that into gear, decided we had enough data collected and started doing that. And about a year and a half ago, I partnered with Mike Ahern and among others, after meeting him at a conference over beers, and discussed it, and we found a way that I could partner with him and actually bring a more academic viewpoint onto the data set. So a lot of stuff I'll be quoting is thanks to this partnership I've had with the University of Houston, and I thank them for loaning me mic at times. So COVID hits. A third of people were actually very prepared. They were already working with strong remote activities. I've been a remote worker for 10 years, but I just bounce around from office to office. That was fascinating. 17% were flat out caught flat-footed. And interestingly enough, when I compared it in the data set from the Zogby survey, it's the Europeans for some reason seem to be worse than the Americans, and even the UK. There seemed to be a stronger ability of where, people either had the networks, they had the cameras, they had the technology, they had the organizational system. We can do hypotheses. I'm just presenting some data here, and we can come up with that. The next thing that came up, which I think had a factor in how well companies reacted to the pandemic, is we asked them, how are you making your decisions around sales planning? And 24% said it's based on gut. And another 29% doing it the way it's always been done. I think of the prior presentations where we're talking about data-driven marketing, data-driven decision-making and the like, and how weak so much of the market was. Half the market is kind of like, we're just going to do it the same way. Think of the problem of doing that under COVID. There is no the way we've done it before when you shut down the global economy in many, many ways. I mean, I was flying home from speaking in Australia on March 9th of last year. And then I didn't get on an airplane until it was time to take my son on a college tour. And that was a fully masked up, and that was only a couple of weeks ago. We changed the world of the business, but you had a lot of people that from a planning perspective, really, and I saw this over and over again, didn't know how to plan. So that's the beginning. But so we started looking at the impact, the compensation of the sales force in the early part of COVID. And one of the first things we noticed, so I saw quotas dropping at a lot of companies. A lot of companies said, wow, we don't think we're going to be able to hit the numbers. We're announcing to the street if we're public, or we're announcing to our board if we're private, that the revenue goals have changed for this year. And I could see it in the quotas. First, I saw the quotas go down, but then we took a deeper dive and discovered that people shifted the quotas. So instead of measuring the people on bringing in net new customers that were getting harder to acquire, and this is, again, across hundreds of companies, they were, I mean, we've got over 1 million people that we're paying. So when I get to look at quotas, I've got a pretty good end to the faculty who are keeping an eye on me for statistically significant data. And all of a sudden we saw this huge jump where it used to be that for a lot of reps, frontline sales reps, especially, less than 10% of their measurement was based on existing customer base. And all of a sudden it pops up there in that 25 to 30% as COVID hit. Companies said, again, here I'm on my conjecture, getting new customers is going to be difficult because nobody's ready yet to buy sight unseen. It's interesting, there's a nonprofit called Two Blind Brothers that sells you luxury goods, but you don't know what you'll get in the box. They're trying to say it's like shopping blind, like these two guys that are losing their eyesight. I see it the same way. Companies initially were reticent to make purchases of a lot of things when they can't kick the tires or when you can't back up the bus of executives to do the dog and pony show on site. But you know who can keep buying from you? Your existing client base. And we saw that change in the actual measures being used to see how the sales force reacts. If that's the measure, think about the titles. And we started taking a look at what was going on with the title classes. And we saw the hunters in the system dropping and farmers continuing. Now, hunters, if you're not familiar with the stereotypical lexicon, is the frontline sales rep. They run out and they close new business. Farmers take care of your existing business. If you want to use a more professional term, you could say the account executives saw their jobs get hammered, whereas the account managers saw their jobs continue and continue very well. And you could even see the same thing if we instead go to inside sales versus field sales. So of the people that are still selling directly and going after new clients, we saw this split come in where everybody took a dip. And anecdotally, a lot of companies said, as people leave, either quit, because they decide sales is going to work for them for a while. It's hard to sell in this environment, even with the guarantee. A lot of companies didn't offer guarantees. People weren't willing to sit around just on a base salary and try and do it right. They were replaced by inside sales reps because, let's face it, there is no field. Kind of hard to have field sales when there isn't a field. So those are a couple of the first things. Now, I actually do want to pull out another piece, and I was thinking about this earlier, the good things someone had said to come out of the pandemic, and we can talk about learning about how effective we can be remotely, even with some of the frustrations we might have. But another thing that came out is it's broken the hiring mechanism at a lot of firms. Mine is one of them, where we are now recruiting outside of our typical Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, Denver, Colorado corridors, where we've always been able to get some great employees, which is also having an impact on diversity. For those companies that claim that they wish to improve the diversity of underrepresented minorities, but they operate in an extremely, monoculture, guess what? It is now a lot easier to go hiring people when you can suddenly put out job postings via LinkedIn and target other communities. So, and I think we're going to see some interesting impacts on that one as well going forward. And I've seen all of that going on. So now let's go into the competitive landscape of what's going on as I keep on going through this. And I promise I'm keeping an eye on the chat window if anybody has a question. By competitive, I'm not talking about against the competition. I'm talking the internal competition that exists among sales reps. I've always enjoyed that little bit, that challenge. If you've ever walked around a sales bullpen, it is an area full of energy. There is, and there is the congratulations, the ringing of the bell. When the bell, rings out across the whole floor, and you can see people, and I've seen that as at various companies I've worked at, and some of our client firms where I've been there lucky enough for the bell to be rung. And I had people stand up and walk out of a meeting I was in to go congratulate the rep who had closed the latest deal. That culture. Well, that brings us to the leaderboard. And the leaderboard is a classic thing. Matter of fact, my personal first experience with the leaderboard is a 1930s Abbott and Costello movie where Lou Costello comes in and starts putting stars up for every vacuum cleaner he's sold. And it's on a chalkboard. When I worked for Canon, I had a division at one of the offices, and they had a massive whiteboard above the bullpen that listed how everybody was doing against their measures and what they were moving at Canon. It's built into Salesforce. It's also built into our product. So leaderboards matter. And there was actually some research that came out a few years ago where they used records from World War II on a bulletin that used to be sent out to the German Air Force, to the Luftwaffe. And what they found was if you saw somebody you'd been in pilot training with had scored a kill, bluntly, I know it is a little dark, you had a higher chance of scoring one yourself. Note, however, you also had a higher chance of crashing because you would assumably take more risks to try and catch up. So they actually could see the leaderboard impact in that data set. Well, I sat down with Mike, and actually it was Yashara Tafi, who's a professor at Denver University, who looked into the leaderboards we have in our software. And he said, he had a control group. We have some customers that choose not to use our software for any sort of a leaderboard. We had customers who did option one. Their leaderboard only showed limited information, which is my performance. And say, ECharles, you are in the top third, or you're ranked number 23 out of 100 sales reps. Option two was, Eric, you're number 23, but Lori is number 22. And so you can see what your performance against quota is versus her performance against quota. Matter of fact, you can see everybody, and you can see who's right behind you as well. And then option three, it actually gives the quota and the actual sales, the actual, dollar amounts that are sitting in there. And Yashar wanted to see, and this is going to be published. This is a submitted paper, so I'm stealing a page because I get to review some of these at times. what was the impact on performance in all of those? You can see that on the graph over there, which I found absolutely fascinating, that it was option 2 that, had the best impact for the mid-range and the bottom 20%, but actually had a negative impact on the top 20%. If you look at the red dot, the red dots were great with limited information sharing. This is where those stars that Tom Steenberg was talking about earlier today sit. For some reason that top piece of the top people drop a little bit. And when you give out all the information, the impact on quota attainment drops the worst. And it's absolutely fascinating to me of like how much information you share in a competition. And you can sometimes see that, in a variety of sports. You can see a team that seems to give up when they don't feel like they can catch up. And I'll actually say, Tom Steenberg's done some of the research that on his core performers versus, and how they found by going to quarterly measurements, they could outperform because, even if they couldn't hit the full year of excellence, they at least could be the best rep for the quarter. This is another almost follow on to that research, in that if you give out too much information, it can have a negative impact on performance. So there is a sweet spot in there of how much information to put up on a leaderboard to let people know how they can compare themselves to each other. The other thing we were dealing with during this whole challenge was turnover, people coming and going. Sales reps were quitting, sales reps were leaving, self-selecting out because, again, they weren't making the money they thought they would make. They were suddenly wanting to change departments, change jobs, go into completely new fields, open up a winery maybe, and do with that. So let's talk about the turnover. And it was 58% of the companies we surveyed saw higher turnover, tech feeling the biggest hits. They saw a much higher turnover. And we looked at it in our data set. So this is the survey data. We saw the same thing in our data set. The number, again, I had customers calling us up and wanting to renegotiate their contract with us because they had gone from 1,000 sales reps to into the mid hundreds just because of the impact of the pandemic. They, again, weren't selling, couldn't sell, didn't have that opportunity. So there was significant turnover. And the companies that did the guarantees, I think, were the smart ones personally, because they made sure they kept those top performers. There's the 80-20 rule, by the way, is real. 20% of the reps bring in 80% of the revenue. And actually it's 21.2% of the reps bring in 80% of the revenue, at least the last time I took a look at our data set. The interesting thing is if I control it for reps who have been there for more than a year, because of the value of tenure, it's actually about 33%. So tenure does have an impact on the ability of a sales team to sell. And we've shown that through a lot of our data sets, which is back to under COVID. One of the smartest things to do is don't lose your great reps, because it's going to take you a while. You can't just hire somebody and replace them overnight. The great thing is that we've been doing research on predicting turnover. So this is using a machine learning algorithm. And we started pouring different elements into there. How long have they been with the company? What's their salary? What's their quota? Has their manager changed? Has their pipeline, when their pipeline changes, all of these pieces, what vertical market industry they sell into, what do they get credited for? But also peer turnover is a huge issue. And then actually overly complex incentive plans cause turnover. So you put all these factors in to the machine learning blender. You keep on adjusting the level of seasonings you put in there, as I like to put it, to drive my engineers crazy. And you start coming up with forecasting. So we could see this in the forecasting engine, especially as, again, performance dropping and peers start leaving. And you can oftentimes see this if you talk to a head of sales, of like when like I say, a popular sales manager leaves and people follow him or her. That has an impact. That has a huge impact. And we could see this coming in. And so we started playing around with this a little bit of like, how easily could we predict who's about to leave the company? So let's go back to those field sales, as I like to keep on saying, what field, as we sit in lockdown. Well, the interesting thing is that we saw managers starting to take advantage of more and more improved dashboards. The graph on the left is a current is, is broken up by tenure versus quota attainment. And now it's funny, I use quota attainment, even though I'm also always quick to tell people, remember, their numbers are not your numbers. So we say quota attainment, but remember, to a sales rep, it's cash. How much money's in their wallet? Can they pay the car payment, mortgage payment, pay for the kids to go to school, etc., put food on the table, depending. But at the same time, one of the easiest ways to measure people is quota attainment versus targeted incentive attainment, and what are they getting? And we're seeing more and more sales managers turn to some simple reports, like a simple scatter plot that gives them idea of quota attainment versus incentive attainment. Now, you might be wondering, why isn't that just a perfectly straight line with the little hooks at different points? That's because no good incentive plan, compensation plan survives first contact with marketing or sales. So you say, we're going to pay 5% of revenue, but when they get above a certain number, the quota, we might pay 7%. But if they get to too high above that, say 200 to 300% of quota, we're going to drop it back down to 5, if not 3, because we did a bad job of quota setting. It can't be because the rep is that good. Fair, fine. I disagree with that, but that's a whole nother discussion maybe we can have over a beer this afternoon at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific, but that's all right. But what we're seeing more and more is that need to do a quick check to see who's gaming the plan by taking advantage of all those contests, but also what is the performance across my team and the value of tenure. And then we've also seen AI come into play to start supporting forecasting. There's about 4 or 5 companies now that offer AI-driven forecasting tools. It's not just mine. Salesforce will build it with Einstein. Clary's got one as well. And then we have one at Exactly. But it's more interesting when we get into intuition and intuition bias. So I talk about be wary of trusting your gut. You remember I opened with that very early on, the number of companies that do things the way they've always done, the number that continue to just, quote, trust their gut. But instead, what I'm looking at here is that if we can bring in information to feed information, it improves the intuition. It feeds the intuition, knowing, man, I've got a feeling there's a problem with this rep. Hold it. The software is telling me that they don't have the right people engaged, like a sales operations leader engaged in that pop-up window. There needs to be some cleanup going on and maybe move out some accounts, or we've got some risk because there's no next step in place. Now, those are the types of alerts you might be able to self-generate if you're a sales leader by digging into the CRM or doing it in that one-on-one stand-up when you ask the rep a question, they kind of go, and we've all, been there if you've been in the sales side of things, or asking a graduate student where they're going for the faculty, how's how's their dissertation topic going? But if you let this, what we're seeing is if you let the system give you hints, you can be a better performer. And one of the best places I can see that is the Navy SEALs. Going back 15, 17 years ago or so, I had an opportunity to observe an interaction of technology and snipers. And they had a Palm Pilot hooked up to measurement equipment that could measure wind speed and barometer, barometer and a variety of other factors, temperature, humidity, and the like, all of which can impact long distance shooting. These are all the things that get involved in that. And so by doing that, it would automatically tell the shooter, you need to aim, left 3 clicks, up 4 clicks to accurately hit the target. So this is all the adjustments that world-class long-distance shooters make. So I'm watching this, and it took mid-range marksmen could suddenly impact perfectly. And said, but my statement at the time, because it's a huge clunky piece of equipment, and I asked a gentleman who I'll simply call Q after the technician from the James Bond movies, that's to protect his identity. I said, Q, what are you going to do when they're in the field? They can't haul all the batteries for that Palm Pilot with them in the field. He said, well, here's what's happened. We have found that if we give them this equipment, show them the right answer over and over and over again, They slowly take that with their own knowledge to be able to start being able to estimate distances, estimate the impact of the wind, estimate the impact of everything else, and build that into their targeting. And they become better. They don't match necessarily the perfect people, but they move, say, from the 50th percentile to the 75th percentile because the technology is feeding into their intuition, and it slowly turns into that subconscious memory that they activate. We're seeing the same thing here with fixing the intuition bias for doing sales forecasting. Keep on giving these alerts, and sales managers start going, oh, I should watch out for this, or, oh, yeah, I don't believe your forecast that deal is going to close this month or this quarter, and we can fix that. So that's been an interesting one that we had a little more time to play with. Now, at the same point, this research on quota adjustments has been a fascinating one. This was before the pandemic, where Alan Benson, while digging through some of our data, discovered that, guess what? Managers are why quotas get adjusted and why actually poor performing reps are kept around. So in summary, what happens is if you're a manager and you're on the cusp of hitting your numbers, you'll keep a poor performer on payroll because they might close a single deal out of luck, which will let them hit their numbers instead of having to deal with the whole turnover piece. So this is all this data fed human behavioral economics that's coming into play in the sales world that people didn't realize it. But at the same point, because people are uncomfortable thinking about all of it, what we're seeing is a whole lot of research that shows that, and we see it again in ours, too many companies just simply give everybody the same quota, regardless of tenure, regardless of territory opportunity, regardless of what they might actually pull off, which is why we get into this world where, you assume that less than 60% of your reps will make quota. You assume that people will not hit the numbers, and think about the difficulty in that. So, and why that needs to come in. And we've actually seen it that if you peanut butter spread the quotas, you actually see 14% less quota attainment. Why? Because you're you're over quoting, over measuring, giving unattainable, results to some sales reps, and you're giving it too hard to others. Now, the fun thing is though, what have we seen under COVID? Part of the problems with peanut butter quotas, why do they do this, is we try to build territories. How do we build territories? How do you decide where someone sells? Oh, you give them the city. They live in Houston, they sell into Houston. You got someone in Dallas, they sell into Dallas. Not too difficult, right? No, pretty clean. Except that Houston and Dallas are two completely different markets. So then these big enterprise companies used to say, we always have a sales rep in every city that has an NFL football team. That was considered to be a decent bellwether, guesstimate of, if it's big enough for an NFL team, they must be big enough to handle our, a dedicated resident sales rep. Well, let me remind everybody that the city of Los Angeles did not have a professional football team for many years. And now San Diego doesn't have one at all. So does that mean you take your rep out of San Diego, move them to LA? Is that smart business decision making? Go back to those earlier market research conversations we're having. So for a while, everybody's trying to put more market research into physical territories, but all of a sudden we went to inside sales and we found that it works. So I hypothesize we're going to see the end of the physical territory for a lot of companies. We're going to see more and more overlapping territories because it doesn't matter where you are if you're willing to just pick up a phone from your home office. So what else did COVID have an impact on? Sales effectiveness. Okay. And this is, how well they're doing. This is how well their performance is, what's happening, people actually getting things done in appropriate fashion, selling all the right things, holding the line on price, keeping tight negotiation patterns, all of those measures of sales effectiveness, where a third said lower and some said it was higher. And the higher is fascinating to me. There's something about sitting remotely that what they were doing actually made them more effective. But if we talk about where everybody's working, what everybody's doing, how they're actually trying to accomplish their goals, more than 30% of companies don't really have a plan to go back to the office. Now, 1 in 5 are fully remote, but do plan to go back to the office. And this actually varies across different geographies. But you can think of Twitter, from the tech industry, you said, you know what, we're closing all of our offices. Salesforce went to a remote thing, but they actually started hearing from their employees wanting to come back to work. At Exactly, we're going with a hybrid model. So of our 600 plus employees, we will have desks for people that want them. We've got a few people coming into our Denver office right now at 20% capacity, which is what the state currently allows. But we're not going to have as much space as we used to have. We're releasing a floor, and we're changing the design of our San Jose office to be a smaller space, but with more space in between. It's gonna be more of a good meeting rooms and the like. And I think this kind of work environment is going to have a huge impact on that management side. I talked about it earlier, of the need for, we've lost the hallway conversation. So we're going to keep on trying to find a way to have conversations with people when everybody's super remote. Because even though we're not going back, you can see the biggest concern is lack of in-person meetings with current and prospective clients is going to continue to be a challenge. That has been a challenge under COVID, because there is that relationship. Think of the sales team members that were hired for their personality, their ability to have that conversation with the customer, to look around the room. Obviously, because of our restrictions, I can't see anybody's faces right now. That's fine. We're sharing the bandwidth. But think of the challenge where you can't read the room. It's like playing poker online. You can, there's no tells anymore left. You can't tell if somebody's not paying attention. It's like my wife talking about running faculty meetings. She's a department chair here at UC Irvine. She's like, people don't turn on their cameras. I have no idea. And she says, oh, heaven help me. My faculty have discovered the chat functioning in the weekly faculty meetings. So now they're all chatting. Now they're all chatting to each other via the chat. I haven't told them yet that I can see it all as the chair, but it's not that much of a concern. So the impact on forecasting, the lack of in-person meetings, the lack of certainty for pipeline, and still companies have these outdated processes that were still based on the concept of coming in. I mean, this might actually have been a huge issue for, a great benefit to DocuSign, because let's face it, people don't have fax machines in their homes anymore, and getting wet signatures, as we used to call them, has got to be difficult and down right now. But if you ask sales leaders what they think, they're kind of split. There's some people that are unhappy if we try to keep the working world this super flexible, work remotely, work from home, work from wherever you are, going. 37% don't want you to be flexible on where you live. They don't want you to be flexible for internal meetings, and they certainly don't want you to be flexible for external meetings. They want people back in the office. They want people back on site. But then again, there's all these companies that are like, we're fine. You'd rather, live as long as you've got, again, stable internet, stable telephone, and the like. Why do I care where you live? Now, there are companies that are saying if you choose to live to a lower cost area, if you leave Manhattan, and live, move to the farm in New Hampshire, for example, we might talk to you about reducing your wages. We're going to do that cost of living adjustment to the negative side to reflect the fact that you no longer live in a high rent area. There are companies doing that, and we're seeing some negative reactions from their employee base, but it seems to be keeping. So that one's going along as well. Finally, the internal and external meetings. It's going to be interesting to see who the first prospective clients are that come into play on this one, saying, we actually want to do something a little bit different. We want to take care of these things. So where to next? I'm going to wrap up here a little quick. I was expecting a few more people to be harassing me during this, so I'm either missing something or y'all are quiet while you're eating your lunches. I think I might have picked up the lunch break though for everybody there.
We're sandbagging.
You're sandbagging me? You're holding back. I'm glad there's a voice in the wilderness, even though I know this is recorded. So space for improvement for improving the forecast, because it's more difficult than ever. And that 25% still relying on the gut feeling. They drive me insane. You got to feed the gut. I feel like I should go get one of the bio faculty that I know that are always yelling at me that I should be eating fancy yogurts and stuff and put healthy gut microbes in there. So I'm going to destroy that analogy at some point. Feed the gut with better information, better data, and start looking at it. Like I said, 69% of companies don't hit their revenue targets. You might not realize it by the time they tell the street, but the truth is they're not hitting the targets. We're seeing these increased sales attrition rates. And by the way, a lot of incentives lost to bad target setting. And by lost, I mean you paid a rep for hitting a target that was too easy. So you're throwing away money in the wrong direction because you just don't know what's going on. This is that space for an improvement that's come out of the analysis. But then if I go back to that state of the survey of what holds us back, like I said, the lack of in-person, budgetary constraints, internal meetings, and face-to-face internal meetings. Tomorrow, I sit in the first of 2 4-hour executive offsites for our company. I've got 4 hours tomorrow morning and 4 hours the next morning. The temptation at some point to just crank up the speakers, turn off the camera, and lie down on the couch behind me is going to be strong, and I'm going to have to fight it. Luckily, I've checked the attendee list and nobody here today works for my company, so I think I'm safe. The cost and budgetary constraints that are still out there for investing in improving processes. Yes, DocuSign costs money. You should still use it. You can use digital signatures. And by the way, you can also use Adobe Echo Sign. Apple, the preview app on my Mac lets me store a digital signature. It's not as fancy as the others, but at least it still records it there. There's so many different ways you can get those digital signatures managed for that thing. And we've got to get people, like I said, to start embracing data analytics and actually bringing data into the sales field. This is part of how sales has changed. There was a couple of numbers that crossed my plate the other day, and one is that's been stated many times that 65% of the buyer's journey occurs without talking to sales. Okay, that makes sense if you think about it. If you want to buy a product, almost any product right now, including the fanciest enterprise product, if you want to compare Oracle Cloud Infrastructure to Amazon Web Services to Microsoft Azure, because you want to go to a public cloud, you can find so much information online. You don't need to talk to the sales rep almost until it's time for a really good customer reference and a price negotiation. Now, and even customer references, because you can go online to a lot of companies, look for the logos they put up on their NASCAR sponsorship splash page. And then you go onto LinkedIn and you look for a friend that works at that company and you get that backdoor reference. Hey, what do you think of this company's product? Are you still happy with it? So that's 65% now. So take 65, write on a piece of paper. 100 minus 65 is what? 35%, right? Well, only 35% of a sales rep's time is spent selling. I'm fully aware those two numbers should not be added together. I just find it fascinating. They add up perfectly to 100%. So our sales reps are spending times and other things all the time right now. Oh, how have new product sales fared? Ooh. I'm sorry, Rosanna just asked me how have new product sales fared under COVID, and I have to find my pen and write that down. I'm going to find out because I can look at that under COVID. Thank you very much. You've just given me a new research piece to chase down. I would love to give you some insights, but I honestly don't have them. I'm more excited about something I can go look at. By the way, there was this question of, Eric, how'd you get this title of evangelist? It's an old title. The first I saw it in the tech industry was Guy Kawasaki at Apple when he had to convince people to develop software for the Macintosh on the business side. And I first read his book, The Macintosh Way, when I was in high school, actually. But one of the things I get to do at the company is play around with the research, play around with the data sets, play around with ideas. And the idea is that I try to keep on coming up with new directions we can take the company and the products and things like that. And I try to look for inspiration in other areas to make sure we're always ahead. Think of that marketing, that the lecture, the session we had earlier on developing new products. This is just an overly busy slide. We're not going to worry about it. This is all the things that go into that data intelligence I've been talking about. I do think it's interesting when you think about the revenue pursuit and like the role of the chief revenue officer. Talk about a job that didn't exist a few years ago. It's like it's like heads of revenue operations. Because it used to be, if you think about, and from the sales team, it used to be sales tech came from IT. IT came and installed sales logics on your computer. And that's where you tracked all your calls, or Act or Goldmine. Then Salesforce came out with the CRM system and started putting all the functionality in Salesforce. And before that, Siebel, of course. And all of a sudden, you started having a head of sales operations who started managing that. Now, if you look at the tech stack of the number of pieces of software that are licensed to make it for an efficient sales rep, everything from a LinkedIn Sales Navigator license to Chorus.ai that listens to everything and looks for keywords, or People.ai that looks, at whether or not you're booking meetings and syncs up all the individuals from your calendar invites back into your CRM. Okay, or InsideSales.com that gives you recommendations of when you should pick up the phone and call a customer and when you should send an email, and even says you should rethink how you write your emails to actually better capture the interest of the recipient. It's huge. Well, that was sales operations. Then all of a sudden somebody said, shouldn't sales be aware of what's marketing doing and getting all the information out of Marketo or Pardot? Or Exact Target, or what other marketing automation systems you're using, HubSpot, and shouldn't that information be fed into the sales team so they know this person was, when they did their 65% journey, this is the journey that we were able to track and see, and all of that started coming in. And so that's all rolling in. So suddenly I see a head of revenue operations who owns the marketing automation and digital demand generation, plus the sales operations. And that's continued as we've gone into, and you can see this in the subscription economy, and people suddenly tracking, the renewals and the upsells and the subscription and net promoter score. And that's all starting to funnel into a single organization that then allows for that revenue optimization side of things. And it's just a fascinating movement in all that. So I've been talking for, I'm actually 3 minutes fast. So, based on my screen, I am very open to ideas. If people have other good, I'll answer questions, or if you want to keep on throwing things down that I can write down on my pad to think of the next round of research we might play around with, I'm happy to do it. That's my email address. That's my cell phone. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to speak to y'all. And any questions?
Okay, so feel free to type into the chat window or just open your mic. I'll open up with one question. So you talked about how long it took a sales rep to kind of get good at what they do.
Yeah.
And so the question I have for you, you have somebody new start. How long do you wait, or how much data do you need before you recognize whether that person might be a star or just a middle of the roader?
So that's a great one. And one to start with is you should do a backwards look at your data to start with at your own firm. I will say we measure how long to the first sale among our sales team, and we measure it it's actually in days. They're still on a ramp quota, but we see how many days from start date to the first close. It varies heavily by industry as well. We oftentimes say it can 6 to 9 months in business to business selling before somebody's really up to speed. And then when we've looked across our customer base, we see that the optimal time is 3 to 5 years of tenure is when the best performance is there. Now, there are so many factors that could be coming into play there, obviously, but that seems to be the sweet spot across our entire customer base. And that has an impact. So I would first say look backwards, but you should be there. I mean, you should be able to see hints of it in the first year, but they're not going to typically be at the same level as the rock stars that you currently have, or the stars. I'll just stick to the stars. I'll take Tom and Mike's number from the earlier presentation of the stars. So keeping on that. It's interesting, the key characteristics, Ralph was asking about key characteristics for hiring salespeople now. Let me jump in and say one thing, and I've been guilty of this in this talk. It's not just guys. We've been reviewing gender pay discrepancies and did actually a study on that a couple of years ago and published it. And one of the things that we saw is that women have higher quota attainment than men on average across industries. And further, they're still underpaid for it, which could be a whole separate conversation we could have. We doubled down on that recently, last year or the year before, and we looked at the impact of female sales managers, and we found that female sales managers got higher performance out of their teams, regardless of the gender on their team, the male sales managers. Now, again, hypothesis, the women who have fought it out in sales might have that different personalities, because you're back to those characteristics of when hiring salespeople now. But I would definitely say it's going to have to be people who are much more facile with the various technology, although that shouldn't be too difficult as we move along. One of the things that Alan Benson discovered in his research on sales management, and I'll bring this up, and it actually hits the STARS research that Tom talked about earlier, is he found that some of the best sales managers were the sales reps who had been able to sell all of the company's products, as opposed to they hit their numbers off of one or two products. And I have a feeling that fits into Tom's screen where he talked about good sales reps who were inquisitive and curious and constantly learning, that those two are tied together. I think by looking at the effective sales that these managers have done, where they were promoted to management, they have been able to sell the company's products, and they got a higher level of performance out of their team than some of the single product, that those two are related. I think there's an overlap there. Sorry, I have to put on my glasses to read some of these. Cover-based movement from current account quota. Have total revenue goals been reduced? Yes. In some companies, we saw a good percentage of the companies in our data set reduced total quotas. They reduced the revenue quotas. Some of them went so far as to not only reduce quotas, though, they reduced the target incentive. They said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring your quota down 15%, let's just say, to reflect the marketplace. We're also going to bring your target earnings down 15%. Now, you can still get back those earnings if you outperform quota. So if you can if you can beat quota, great, then you can get back to your target earnings. But we're not going to give you the same target earnings for hitting quota after we reduce the quota. We're going to reduce the target incentives and the target quota together. I saw that. I saw other companies that just reduced the quota. They were happy to pay more for less business. Same idea, to keep people moving, but they wanted to lower the negative feeling of, I can't sell in this environment. Give me something that's absolutely possible. Incentive offer for those less than 3 years to increase attainment. I don't know about 3 years, but one of the interesting things I saw once, another piece that Alan did that we looked at, we found that the more pay at risk actually increased how quickly somebody ramped up. So by pay at risk, think of pay mix. If you're on a 50-50 plan or a 40-60 plan, 40% base salary, 60% target incentive, versus the flip of the 60-40, 60% base salary, 40% target incentive. He saw that people actually, their attainment, that how quickly they ramped up increased, and concurrently people opted out of the sales career faster. I'm sure I don't think we've, if you think of stockbrokers that are on 0-100 plans, which I was at one point in my life, I had no base salary. The only way I paid the bills was by convincing people to buy equities. You certainly have an incentive to get moving on that. Of course, there's other risks of a 0-100 plan, which is what sort of, and that's back to Hart and Holdenstrom, their Nobel research on principal agent theory, and how much risk are you willing to give up in exchange for your for the performance that you need for it to go after. That they got the Nobel for that one, or the in honor of the Nobel, however that's properly worded. The greater than 1 year, the greater than 1 year on the sales effectiveness for the sales cycles. Yeah, I'll admit that I can't necessarily see that in my data all the time. I've worked with the defense industry and other groups like that, where it is like multi-year sales cycles and then multi-year management. That's one of the places where you see account executive and account manager are really the same thing. If you're selling Boeing aircraft to Southwest Airlines, you probably own that account along with several other people, and you're just constantly working with them. And it takes many years to convince them to buy a particular aircraft, the next generation, and move on. The Airbus versus Boeing fights that go on, or what you see in the cluster of businesses around the Pentagon that I've worked with, because they're selling products and services. And again, it can take a long time to get the US military. You go through the proof of concept phase and the like. But I'll admit, I'm not that great with those super long sales cycles like that. Apologies that I can't bring better data on that one.
What is your opinion about the training that often happens for new salespeople, where they become apprenticed or just mentored by a more seasoned salesperson?
So, one, I love the ride-along concept. More importantly, to me, it's a great way of testing someone to see if they're capable of being a sales manager. So apprenticing somebody, if I, apprentice one to the other, I'm testing two things. It should be able to get them to learn a few key skills, key interactions. This is how I present this particular product. This is how I talk about it. But I can also then analyze the impact. It seems that the 5 people that apprenticed for, Samantha have shown a higher ramp timing, or shorter ramp timing, excuse me, higher performance during the ramp, than the people that apprenticed to William, who they took a little longer. Now, you have to have enough data to make sure you're not making a gut reaction off of just 1 or 2. But what a great idea to then say, it looks like Samantha might be somebody we want to start training up for the managerial path. So that's one reason I like the mentoring. The other idea of the ride-alongs that makes it real. There's only so much you can do in the classroom. Sorry to the faculty. And sales enablement is a whole scientific area that's fascinating. I've seen the 2-week sales boot camp with the fire hose, but I always worry about the old Ebbinghaus effect of, how long's the forgetting curve as it kicks in. So then I've started seeing more and more companies that go with 3 hours a day of boot camp, and then getting into building out pipeline, practice pitches, practice decks, and the like. The other one is sales as a career. And that is one of where, you see the account development rep, sales development rep, which are typically people in business who do the cold calls, book meetings for account executives to then go off and sell to. And companies, there's a lot of companies still fail to treat their SDRs, BDRs, ADRs as the bench for their account executives, or they want to hold them there too long. And because I've had clients come to me and say, we keep on losing our BDRs. Is our comp plan bad? I said, no, you're expecting them to be a BDR for 2 years. And there's some people in there that they want to move up. And we can make all the millennial jokes we want to, even though the leading edge of the millennials are 40 years old right now. So we should really back off from that. But so you can make all those jokes that you like, but the truth is people are like, okay, I've shown my ability to hit my numbers to book meetings constantly. What do I have to do to become an account executive? If not, there's another company out there that will happily hire me in 5 minutes. So that's been an important one as well. That's why I like those BDRs, ADRs, getting a feel for it, then moving into account executive, because they've already had to learn the quick pitch. And now they can learn the longer pitch. And plus, Lemkin and Ross were both Aaron Ross wrote the book Predictable Revenue. Even he says, yeah, your account exec should still be able to pick up a phone. They should never forget how to do that to build their own pipeline.
Right. So, I've in some of the pipeline to fill the sales, all the sales functionality, you run into people that love sales, but they don't want to travel. And, there's nothing you're going to do that's going to make them excited about traveling, their family situation, where they live, what it is. What do you do with them if not leave them in place?
They again, that's where I think we have proven in the last year that inside sales is still very effective.
Mhm.
And you let inside sales, there is nothing wrong with inside sale. Instead of making inside sales a proving ground, and I separate out the ADR, BDR, SDR that I was talking about from inside sales. There's nothing wrong with selling business. You can sell your business over the phone and over the Zoom. Great. People have
Yeah.
gotten very comfortable with it over the last 15 or some odd months. Well, or maybe last 12 months, probably took the first few months for people to get used to it, as we all dealt with. I've got a retractable green screen in my ceiling that I can drop and put the fancy backdrops, and we all got excited about doing different Zoom backdrops there for a while.
Yeah.
You know, I've got 20 or 30 of them myself. So I think you're going to need to keep them there, because yeah, they're going to, I think we're, you know, just because we are at the beginnings of getting out of all of this, I don't think we're going to see a ton of face-to-face selling. That I don't think it's going to explode into the marketplace that quickly. I think it's still going to take a while. So we've got probably have another year of this just in business adjustments as companies decide, are you willing to ship them out? Or as I like to say, I'll know it's changed when Mark Benioff holds Dreamforce for Salesforce and 250,000 people crawl into San Francisco again.
Yeah, right. Great. Anybody else have another question? Of course, you've been able to take down the email and the phone number, and we know where to find them at 4 o'clock. So thanks so much, Eric. This was really, really interesting, and an area that I know we've always wanted to ask more questions of people who could tell us not the gut feel, but the data. So thanks so much for sharing that.
My pleasure. Y'all have a great day, and I'll see you at happy hour.
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to take a break until 3 o'clock. And we'll be back at 3 with a collection of folks doing a panel discussion. So I hope I'll see you all then. We're going to leave this open. If anybody wants to chat with each other, you all know how that works. You can just pick a name and type a note and talk to each other if you'd like. And so that's all open, and we'll see you back here at 3.